Welcome to the May 2025 Bay Area Culinary Historians presentation. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Tracy Johnston, an avid foodie, food history buff, and longtime food blogger. Tracy translated all 900 of Encarnación Pinedo's recipes in a parallel text format, making it simple to compare Pinedo's works directly with the translation. This includes recipes not found in Strehl's 2003 book. Also, Tracy has been redacting the recipes and reports them on her blog, The Spanish Cook Without Equal. Please welcome her as she shares the adventures she has had during this journey and highlights the questions and mysteries that remain.
Well, thank you, everyone. Making sure I'm not muted. Okay. Hi, my name's Tracy Johnston, and I would like to share with you my adventures in translating Encarnación Pinedo's 1898 cookbook. Lorenzo Pinedo, born about 1810, possibly in Ecuador, is claimed to be the only survivor of a shipwreck off Monterey, California in the 1830s. It's not clear if this shipwreck story is true. The only documented shipwreck around his time period was the Natalia, and there were many survivors, most of whom were already on shore when the ship sank. Maria del Carmen, she went by Carmen, was a member of an influential California family, the Berryessas, in what is now the San Jose and Santa Clara region of California. She was born in 1811 in San Francisco. Lorenzo and Carmen married on August 25, 1839, at the Mission Santa Clara. Their first child, Margarita, only lived for a year. The couple received a 3-square-league land grant from Governor Juan Alvarado in 1842, which became Rancho Las Uvas, named because of the wild grapes which grew there. Currently, it is the site of the Uvas Reservoir. Their second child, Dolores or Mary, was born in 1846. Their third and last child, Encarnación, was born in 1848. She was named after her uncle. Notice that is the beginning of the Gold Rush era, marking the end of the California era. To put Encarnación's life into a nutshell, her father Lorenzo passes away from an illness in 1852 when Encarnación was 4 years old. Though the family was now poorer than they had been, Encarnación got an education, including from the Notre Dame Academy, which is now Santa Clara University. She could read and write in both English and Spanish. She never married, but her sister Dolores did. Dolores married an Anglo, William Fitz, and they had many children. Encarnación lived with her sister's family and cooked for them. Over time, she gained a reputation as a good cook. From this, she was inspired to write her own cookbook. Encarnación Pinedo published her cookbook, El Cocinero Español, The Spanish Cook, in 1898 when she was about 50 years old. It is the first cookbook published by a Latina in the United States and is considered to be a valuable collection documenting Rancho period/California recipes. It is over 300 pages long and contains an essay on the history and importance of food, as well as about 900 recipes. She dedicated it to her nieces, so that you always keep in mind the merit of a woman's work, and so that it will always be recorded how much your dear aunt loved you. Señorita Pinedo passed away 4 years later in 1902. Let us now fast forward to 2021. We were in the midst of a pandemic. I stayed home a lot and was looking for something productive to do in the evenings. My attention turned to California food history. I have long had an interest in historical cooking and have collected cookbooks all my life. I have over 300 at last count, and the collection still grows. In 2003, I joined a historical society with a public education mandate and developed an Elizabethan English field kitchen. This is an outdoor food preparation area. I used it to present historical cooking demonstrations to the public. There, as a reenactor, I recreated period recipes while discussing them with anyone who stopped by to watch. I cooked over fire and used period techniques and equipment as much as possible. I had to know what foods were available at the time, and I learned so much. Spice mixes, food combinations, what was trendy and what was falling out of favor, and more. These details were all important in order to put the living history into context and present what people ate. In 2012, I created a food blog called Good Eats. This is my very first post. I allowed myself the freedom to cook from any culture and any time period. I have explored the Roman Empire, medieval Syria, the recipes of a 16th century Transylvanian prince's court, and various time periods in England, France, Germany, the United States, and more. I've made cordials, pies and tarts, stews, salads, roasted meats, and a variety of sauces. I've pickled, fermented, infused, braised, baked, roasted, and fried. Some recipes had to be redacted. That is, I had to figure out the measurements and the temperatures and infer the techniques. Sometimes they failed. The food wasn't tasty or even edible, but most of the time they were successful. I have documented my experiences on the blog with over 300 posts and have had over 200,000 page views. So it was reasonable to look for something productive relating to food history. And my partner has quite the California history library. This made a natural pairing. Together, we sketched out time periods for analyzing food influences and availability, and I started exploring. It was trying to find details of the California or Rancho era that I first saw references to Señorita Pinedo's book. I learned that Dan Strehl had translated it in a book published in 2003 titled Encarnación's Kitchen. It's a good book with fun essays to read, giving the history of the Pinedo family, also noting her book is a sociological document and tying it to Mexican culinary traditions. I tried one of the recipes, mancha manteles, which translates to stains the tablecloth. When I read reviews of Mr. Strehl's book, I noticed that people were saying they wished they could see the recipes in their original Spanish, and also that they wanted to see all the recipes. That is when I realized Mr. Strehl had translated about 1/3 of El Cocinero Español, and I wondered if, all these years later, anyone had translated the entire book. Digging around the internet, it was during a pandemic, and I had the time, I came across Señorita Pinedo's entire book in PDF format, which I downloaded. Okay, true confessions time. I don't speak or read Spanish, but I wanted to know the recipes. So I gave Google Translate a try and was impressed with the results. It wasn't until after I had it translate several recipes that I realized I could translate the entire book. Please understand that I did not rely solely on Google. It isn't perfect. I never could get it to translate cerifolio as the herb chervil. It always translated as wax or waxleaf. I acquired two very good Spanish to English dictionaries, one of which is an older edition. This was important because language shifts over time, and I needed help with the usage of some of the older words. My years of experience with historical recipes means that I speak old cooking, and that is what I brought to the project. I also did extensive searching over the internet, finding websites that had recipes similar to what I was reading, especially for dishes I had never heard of before, like cajetes and antes. It's exciting to find that some people have documented their traditional family recipes. I also found digital copies of Mexican cookbooks that were older than El Cocinero Español. They helped me see techniques and changes over time. Some websites help me identify unusual ingredients from a variety of geographical locations. I also connected with language experts, especially when my translations got bogged down. Along the way, I put in detailed footnotes of what I was discovering. I went over every recipe one at a time, making sure the English version was as accurate as I could make it, that the techniques and instructions made sense both in English and for cooking. I'm telling you all of this in hopes that you see that I did my due diligence. The result was a translation in parallel text. My margins are wider so that I had space to add footnotes, but I was even able to match the special fonts. You can see that some entries are advice, like how to use olive oil and how to choose the right olives for a dish. But she also included directions, like how to make a stuffing for large olives and how to infuse anise seeds in brandy to make anise water. Translating and footnoting was quite the culinary adventure. I gained an appreciation for her culture, her heritage, and her skill. Señorita Pinedo included recipes with styles from a variety of countries, as illustrated by these examples from her meatball section. Spanish, German. Lardo is pork fat cured with salt and sometimes herbs and is used as a flavoring and an added fat. Italian. The recipe is not clear what animal the leg meat is from. The general concept for meatballs is to take ground meat, mix it with binders like eggs or soaked breadcrumbs, add flavorings, form the balls, and cook them. What makes them Spanish, German, or Italian depends on the choices the cook makes within the concept. We see the Spanish one uses veal and poultry, the German one uses beef or pork, and the Italian uses, well, leg meat. The added fat is butter for Spanish, lardo for German, and cheese in the Italian. The flavorings of herbs and spices vary according to the country, too. All three recipes require cooking the meatballs in a hot broth. The Spanish just lists broth. The German calls for a broth seasoned with parsley and green onion. The Italian has the most complex broth, adding saffron and pepper at the end of the cooking time to further season it. This makes me think that sometimes the broth is served with the meatballs, like in the Italian recipe, or not, possibly in the Spanish recipe. Notice too that the size of the meatball is important. I choose the size according to how much I want the meatball emphasized. Is it a team player with the other ingredients? So choose small or regular. Or is it the star of the show? So choose large. The German recipe notes to make the meatballs bigger than ordinary. I learned some interesting ways of handling certain food items, like in her recipe for pickled herrings. The, the first step is to desalt the herrings in milk. In the 1800s, herring were routinely caught, gutted, and packed in salt. After several days, brine was added. This preserves against spoiling, and the fish were ready for market. Desalting was a necessary step to make them edible. A marinade or pickle is made from mushrooms, parsley, and onions, which are mixed with olive oil. Most people tend to think that pickling must include vinegar, but that kind of pickling does not seem to be the goal here. It is not clear without trying the recipe how many minutes is a few. I think it would depend on the goal. If you wanted to just get the herring oiled for cooking, then literally just a few minutes would achieve that, and perhaps a very light flavoring from the other ingredients would occur. If you left the herring in longer, you might get more of the onion, parsley, mushroom flavors into the fish flesh. It could also be that finely chopping the marinade ingredients would result in them sticking to the herring with the oil, and so would impart their flavor upon cooking. The olive oil would allow the breadcrumbs to stick well to the fish. The combination of oil and crumbs would protect the fish against drying out from a hot fire. To take color would probably be seeing the breadcrumbs brown. That gives a visual cue that the fish was cooked enough as long as the fire wasn't too hot. Señorita Pinedo had access to a variety of animals that were butchered nearby. She could get large cuts or even whole animals. For example, she gives us instructions on how to cook a suckling pig. We are not told what the cooking method is, but I assume it is cooked in an oven. Covering the pig with bacon means it would be difficult to cook on a spit unless the bacon was somehow pinned to the pig's surface. Otherwise, turning the spit would cause the bacon to fall off. Also keep in mind that she is probably thinking of a wood-fired oven made of brick or stone, and not a more modern metal oven, which might not have a box big enough to fit a whole pig. She specifically lists cooking on a spit in this recipe. Notice that she describes what the metal spit looks like and how to set it up, making me believe that spit roasting was uncommon in her area. In this recipe, she mentions wrapping a pork roast with pig caul fat before roasting. Caul is a membrane found around the digestive organs and is used to trap moisture and to provide a succulent flavor to roasts or sausages. It is wrapped tightly around the meat. Incidentally, the word caul also refers to a type of woman's historical headdress that wraps snugly around the hair. I find this recipe interesting too because she directs us to take a pork roast and flavor it with ham as well as spices. One recipe that I've tried where you do a similar thing, the ham added the necessary salt. Some of her recipes introduced me to foods and techniques that originated with the indigenous people of Mexico. The word pipián indicates a sauce that is of ancient Aztec and Mayan origin, made from ground seeds, typically pumpkin. This recipe uses melon seeds and also almonds. She has adapted the old technique to a new ingredient, almonds, which were not available in the pre-contact New World. That the nuts and seeds are ground and put into water makes me think of the medieval European technique of making almond milk. Ground almonds are steeped in hot water, broth, or wine, then strained, and the resulting creamy liquid is used in place of milk in many recipes. The instructions in this recipe do not specify hot or boiling water, but that is what I would use since she says to add the almond and melon seed broth. The pipián made here would have some spicy kick from the toasted chilies, a thick mouthfeel from the toasted bread, and a richness from steeping the ground nuts and seeds. It is probably red from the chilies. Depending on how many chilies you use, it could really enhance the flavor of the roasted poultry, and it would look pretty too. We are given very detailed instructions on how to properly pit roast a beef head. I find this recipe fascinating because of the vocabulary. Tatamata refers to the process of roasting in a pit, which she describes in detail. Dig a pit, heat it and stones within it with a blazing fire until everything is red hot. Remove the wood and half the stones. Put in the wrapped head. Put hot stones around it. Cover the top with peppermint, a bag, then ash and dirt. Let it cook all night and into the morning. So that tells us to tatamar means to pit roast, and that the tatama is the assembled pit. Tatamata head means to roast a beef head in the pit. Pit roast is not an uncommon cooking technique in human history. Think about Hawaiian luau's, but I loved the words, and especially that fresh peppermint was used as a flavoring agent. Señorita Pinedo cooked for her sister's family that reportedly had 11 children. Some recipes had a person's name on them. She lists her nieces' names in her dedication: Carmencita, Leticia, Ida, Angelina, Erminia, and one who is married, so is listed by her husband's name, Mrs. George W. Pollard. Mr. Strehl lists all the children's names in his book's introduction, so we add these names to the list: William, Luna, Carmelita, Charles, Lena, and Arturo. A look at some genealogy sites suggests that a likely possibility for Mrs. Pollard is one Lura J. Fitz. I believe that the name was misspelled and should be Luna. This is just guessing, but the details of the time and location match pretty well. Senorita Pinedo kindly included a recipe for her sister, Dolores, as Mrs. W. Fitz. Senorita Pinedo calls for ingredients that I am not sure she had access to. For example, in this recipe for cooking green peas with green onions and cabbage lettuces, she uses the phrase alberjon a la francesa, which indicates the French hostel pea. This is grown in Mexico today, and it is used fresh or dried. When dried, it is used in soups and stews, and it can be ground and used to make tortillas. Here, she is saying to use the fresh peas, which indicates they were being grown in her San Jose area. It is possible, but her wording, the French way of cooking green peas, makes me think she is not specifying the French hostel pea. I think she saw it as a French technique for cooking any fresh peas on hand. She also references the white sweet potato. This is like the familiar orange sweet potato, but with white flesh and a milder, less sweet flavor. It is a native of Central and South America. Today it is grown around the world, but it does best in a semi-tropical climate. Santa Clara probably can grow it, but it is not clear that it did then. Did she get this recipe from a book or a person who had access to the white sweet potato further south? Was it imported? Did she have a substitution? I don't know. Regarding this dish called cajeta, modern cajeta recipes make a soft caramel, similar to dulce de leche. It is made by reducing goat and or cow's milk that is mixed with sugar and salt. In Senorita Pinedo's time, a cajeta was a soft sweet typically made from fruit and sugar. It was a way to preserve the flavor of the fruit for a long time. Sometimes cajetas were used as fillings for cakes or pastry shells. She has a number of recipes for a quintessentially Mexican dish, stuffed chiles. We are given directions for stuffing dried chilies, which involves soaking them in warm water, removing the stems, veins, and seeds, filling them with a stuffing called mince, coating with beaten egg, and frying in a lot of hot oil. Or we can stuff green chilies, which are fresh and so are toasted and steamed to remove their skins, then treated just the same as the dried chilies. Then she gives us individual recipes for the egg wash, the stuffing, and the sauce in which the chilies are served. I find the given level of detail interesting. For the egg wash, we are cautioned to beat the whites with a wicker fork or spoon, but not a whisk. I don't know why. The yolks are mixed with the whites just before the chilies are put into the wash. Since the yolks and the whites are to be half stirred, I think the wash will be multicolored. This could make a visually appealing presentation. The stuffing or mince uses a combination of beef, olives, apples, onions, mushrooms, and raisins, along with tomato juice. This wonderful blend strikes me as very Mexican in style and reminds me of classic tamale fillings. The mince is completely cooked in advance because the short frying time will only cook the egg wash and the chilies. This recipe has two directions that we don't normally think of doing today. Take the nerves off a good piece of raw sirloin. I don't think I have ever seen a nerve on a piece of beef and had not thought about needing to remove them until I read this recipe. She might have meant the thin membrane that surrounds the muscles. I have also never had to worry about washing my raisins before use. I've made my own raisins at home and didn't need to rinse them once they were dried. But reading about how big farms dry grapes in the field in the sun, I can see how they can get dusty or have bugs on them. Fortunately for us, today raisins are cleaned before packaging. The sauce itself is a production made with onions, olives, and spices. These are not the only recipes in the stuffed chili section. There are directions for intriguing fillings made with shrimp, salt cod, cheese, scrambled eggs with artichokes, or even sardines. Instead of using an egg wash and frying the chilies, we can stuff them and cover them with hot vinegar, pickling them and storing them for later. Her recipes come from a variety of geographic locations throughout Mexico and Latin America. For example, entomatado is a stew made of pork or pork rinds simmered in a sauce of green capote tomatoes, chilies, onions, garlic, and spices, traditionally served at noon in the central regions of Mexico. This recipe is called chicken marinade, but is really a stew and is popular in the Yucatan Peninsula. Valparaiso, Chile, the jewel of the Pacific, was a major stopover port for ships traveling between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans in the 19th century. She also mentions breads that originate from or are considered typical of Oaxaca, Sonora, and Puebla, and sausages from Chiapas. This recipe, Catalan horchata, is interesting because of its changes over time. In Catalan, Spain, horchata's name is horchata de chufa. It's a drink made from water, sugar, and chufas, also known as tiger nuts. This is a very old recipe, as tiger nuts were imported to Spain by the Moors, and the drink is referenced in the 13th century in Valencia. Next, it is clear that Señorita Pinedo utilized and adapted recipes from an older Mexican cookbook, Nuevo Cocinero Mexicano, which I abbreviate as NCM. There were many editions, and I don't know which one she had, but they were published throughout the 1800s. NCM says horchata is made from ground melon seeds, water, and sugar. You can see the adaptation from the Old World tiger nuts to the seeds of the New World plants, and it also touches on the Aztec and Mayan use of ground seeds soaked in water. Modern horchata is typically made from rice, water, milk, sugar, and cinnamon. None of the recipes use brandy, so I believe that Catalan horchata was inspired by the flavors of horchata. This recipe is similar to the brandy flips that were popular in colonial America. Flips are like eggnogs, but flips don't have milk or cream. It was my search for books like NCM that allowed me to solve a puzzle brought up in Strehl's book. These references in her introduction list rare and unusual English cookbooks. Victor Valle, a professor of ethnic studies, wrote an essay for the beginning of Strehl's book. In it, he notes that her knowledge of the Widowvoss treasure, a book he believed did not exist, showed that, quote, her knowledge of these texts came from hearsay, but that her education and the company she kept, unquote, was very good. What I discovered is that she learned of these cookbooks from an encyclopedia set, probably the International Cyclopedia, a compendium of human knowledge, published in 1890. But it could have been from Chambers' Encyclopedia, a dictionary of universal knowledge for the people, published in 1874. They have nearly identical articles titled Cookery, and it is clear that Señorita Pinedo quotes and paraphrases from it extensively in her introduction. Here is a section from the article that lists the Old English cookbooks. Notice that Widowvoss is actually spelled widows. From that, I was able to find a copy of the book. It was written by John Partridge in 1595 and contains recipes for medical remedies, making dyes and inks, confectionaries, syrups, and life improvements like how to make a beard grow. There is so much more I could show you about what I've learned from Señorita Pinedo's book. I felt like I was traveling the world through time and place. There were recipes where I needed to translate the old cooking aspects, like when her directions said to boil between two fires. Modern cooks wouldn't necessarily know that meant to have hot coals below the pan, but also to pile some on top of its lid. The modern interpretation is to cook it in an oven. This picture shows my experiment with baking bread on my hearth. Notice the hot coals above and below the Dutch oven. There was a point where I had thought through enough recipes to know that I wanted to cook from the book. But where to start? There were so many appealing choices. The primary challenge I faced was acquiring all the ingredients. Some I just couldn't find, either because they aren't available in my area at all, or they were out of season, or I just didn't know where to look. One skill I needed to acquire was preparing dried chiles for use. Reading in books and on websites showed me what to do. First, I toasted them on a hot skillet until they were puffy, soft, and toasted. Then I removed their tops and stems, the veins and the seeds. After that, I soaked them in hot water until they were tender. When they were drained, they were ready, and boy, did they smell good. But what should I do with them? This recipe, tamales al vapor, caught my attention because Señorita Pinedo labeled it as the latest novelty. Tamales were not novel to her, but this presentation was. I'll show you why shortly. I used the prepared chiles to make a red sauce following one of her recipes. Notice that she gives quantities for the seasonings, but does not specify how much sauce you get from pureeing the chiles. Since I was going to add more to the sauce, I did not adjust the amounts at this time. Then I used the directions from several of her recipes to create a filling. It had chicken and many of the classic Mexican tamale filling ingredients like onions, olives, raisins, nuts, garlic, toasted chili seeds, oregano, and vinegar. What made this recipe a novelty was that it was assembled in a pudding mold, meaning a mold for an English-style steamed pudding. This mold is upside down to emphasize the hole in the middle. As you can see, it has a lid. I adapted by using a tube or bundt pan. Here, I have lined the pan with homemade masa dough and put in the filling. I covered the top with more masa dough, then a cloth, and then foil to seal it since I didn't have a lid. It steamed for about 2 hours, then cooled so I could handle it. I turned it over onto a plate to serve. Success! Fortunately, it slipped out of the mold without sticking or breaking. Whew. It was very tasty. The flavors were balanced, the chicken tender, and the spices were good. The feedback on it was that it could use more spicing to make it more exciting, but I thought it was fine as it was. I wished that the masa was more tender. It was not bad, just not as tender as I had hoped for. I have since learned how to achieve that. Not every recipe was so complicated or time-consuming. This roasted quail recipe was very simple and tasty. My quail was already cleaned, so I went straight to wrapping it in some ham, and then wrapping it in a grape leaf from my garden. Grilling it was easy. Also, the foil packets you see contain quail with a little oil, salt, and pepper for taste comparison. I really liked the flavor combination. The ham added savory and salt, and the leaf added an acid bite that really brightened each mouthful. The foil-wrapped quail was tasty too, but not nearly as interesting. After having learned what a cajeta is, I had to try one of the recipes. What appealed was this milk and pineapple cajeta. I was intrigued with combining milk and pineapple, as well as trying my hand at getting the thickness right. There were two challenges: figuring out what a kettle cup, una taza caldera, was, and knowing what she meant by reaching the point of cajeta. About the kettle cup. The internet was not helpful, so I looked at every recipe Señorita Pinedo had that referenced it and attempted to deduce the quantity it represented. I ended up making the recipe twice. Also, I scaled her measurements down by 1/8. The first time, I used 1/4 cup of pineapple juice. It took a long time to cook it to a thickness I was happy with. You can see how the drips piled up onto the surface here. When chilled, it set up nicely. Oh, it was thick, sweet, smooth, creamy, and tasty. It was not too sweet, and it had a cooked milk flavor that I appreciated, but it was missing the taste of the pineapple. It also had some signs of scorching, as you can see here. I tried it again, using the same amounts, except I used 1 cup of pineapple juice. I changed the cooking procedure a little, aiming for a lower heat to avoid any scorching. Here is the result. You can see that it is softer, and there was no scorching. The flavor was more like pineapple, but not enough to really say you were eating something with pineapple in it. More reading around the internet made me think I might have been better off using wheat starch instead of cornstarch, as it holds better with long cooking. Other suggestions including cooking it for a long time in a slow cooker with the lid off. It was still good, just not what I set out to achieve. Clearly, I do not yet understand what quantity a kettle cup represents. My current opinion is that it is about a pint. There are many more mysteries to be addressed in Señorita Pinedo's book. We need to know if she really had access to ingredients she lists in her recipes, like the crevetta, which is an old world word for what we today call the puchero or Pinocchia, a type of crustacean found only in Europe. Or bay beans, which grow on coastal sand dunes in tropical regions and are not a common food source because only the immature beans are edible. The mature beans are toxic. She could have easily acquired acetone, also known as bisnaga, because it is the candied fruit of the barrel cactus, which grows in desert regions. But could she have gotten chilitos, which are the fresh fruit? I also think it would be interesting to trace the origins of her recipes as much as possible. How many came from NCM? What other books did she take from? And how did she modify them? Señorita Pinedo, an unmarried woman in the late 1800s, at age 50, published the first cookbook written by a Latina in the United States. Was she famous? No. Did she make a lot of money? Probably not. But in her own way, she achieved. She broke through a barrier in which she shared with us the broad knowledge and interests she acquired over her lifetime. Because she preserved the culture she grew up in for her nieces, who were raised in an Anglo household, she emphasized the value of a woman in her male-dominated society. And she alone captured an important part of history. Her book shows us the California culture from a woman's point of view. We wouldn't know any of this without her. I appreciate your time and attention while I showed you snapshots of my journey translating Señorita Pinedo's book, El Cocinero Español. I have titled my translation as The Spanish Cook Without Equal because that is the name Señorita Pinedo wanted for her book, as she said in her introduction. But I feel it is also appropriate because I want to honor the woman who wrote it. Hers is the only cookbook we have of the California culture, and her achievements benefit us all. It's an amazing record, and I know that I have not discovered all the insights it contains. I continue to cook from it and write about the results on my blogs. I'm hoping to get my book published. I amused myself by designing a cover for it. Thank you so much.